Canada or in Europe?
Well, I think it's really important to note in that there were a number of countries, some you noted, where the world and journalists covered this closely, were skeptical that they would remain as unified and take steps as aggressive as they have to stand up against Russian aggression. This is an example of that. Certainly there's a lot we work with Italy on and will continue to, and the meeting will have a range of topics discussed, but of course we've taken note of the efforts they have and their leadership in standing up against President Putin and Russian aggression. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Congrats to you, and thanks for your words. I wanted to ask Corinne, though, if she could share some words about what this means to her, what this means to you.
Sure.
And if you could talk a little bit about the historic nature of what you're about to.
Come on up. The good news is the podium height is the same because we're both very short. So go ahead.
Well, thanks for your question. I first want to take this opportunity while I have it to thank Jen. She has been just a wonderful colleague, a friend, a mentor during this past year and a half, and I don't think I would be here without so many people, but including her. And she is just a true, solid, amazing person. And so we were very lucky to have her here this past year and a half. So I wanted to make sure I had the opportunity, since I have the opportunity
Give you another
to say
hug.
that. We were doing a lot of crying,
Yeah.
so I'm trying not to do it now. Wow, I'm still processing it because, as Jen said at the top, this is a historic moment and it's not lost on me. I understand how important it is for so many people out there, so many different communities that I stand on their shoulders, and I have been throughout my career. And so it is an honor and a privilege to be behind this podium in about a week or so when Jen is ready. And that is something that I will honor and do my best to represent this president and this first lady the best that I can, but also the American people. And so it is, it's a very emotional day. That's probably the best way that I can explain that. A very emotional day. And I just appreciate this time in this moment. And I hope that I make people proud.
I mean, there's a lot of folks who questioned when this day would happen. I mean, what is your message to those? And like, what is the message to young girls, to
and young boys too.
communities?
Yeah, young girls and young boys. Let's not, I think this is important for them to see this as well. I used to teach college students. I had the pleasure of doing that for about 6-7 years, and they would ask me, a similar question, like, how did you get to where you got to? And I would say to them, and it took me a little bit of time to figure this part out that I'm about to share with you, which is follow your passion, follow what you believe in, and just keep that focus, because that matters. I think if you are passionate about what you want to be or where you want to go, and you work very hard to that goal, it will happen. And yes, you'll be knocked down and you'll have some tough times, and it won't be easy all the time, but the rewards are pretty amazing, especially if you stay true to yourself. And so that's what I would tell them, and I see them from time to time, and they always mention those words that I just shared with all of you. And so that's what I would say. And, there are people who support them, people who will lift them up when they're down. And so I think that's really important to know. And I think so many of them as well, they are standing on shoulders on folks who came before them and are creating these opportunities that I currently have, and will, take that on the best as I can.
Have you ever doubted being a woman of color? Have you ever doubted being in this position one day?
No, not at all. Just worked hard towards it. But I understand how hard it is. I do. We all do. But just keep working hard towards it. I'm going to give it back to Jen. Thanks, everybody.
The Catholic Church was just vandalized with pro-abortion slogans in Colorado. It just happened recently. Is the White House aware of that, first of all?
I have not seen that report. Obviously, we don't condone vandalism. We condone peaceful protest, and that's something certainly we're encouraging with everybody who feels passionate.
Going after targeting Catholic churches, especially when it involves Roe. That's what they're basically focusing on.
Again, we don't condone vandalism. We condone peaceful protest. I think it's important to note that 60% or 70%, depending on the poll you look at, of the American people do not want Roe to be overturned. I'm going to move on. Go ahead.
Will the president respect the High Court's final
I think we're
decision
moving on.
Roe
Go
v.
ahead.
Wade?
So,
No, this is a
Jen,
follow-up. That's all, just like everyone else should think.
a coalition of racial justice advocates sent a letter to the White House asking Biden to issue an executive order about reparations. Has Biden seen the letter? Has he read the letter? Is there a response to the letter?
I'm not aware of the letter. I'd have to take a look at it, and we can see if there's more of a substantive response to you after the briefing.
And just a follow on executive actions.
Sure.
Is, as things get sort of harder to pass through Congress, is there a sense of whether or not the White House is looking more at executive actions as a means of getting things that are not able to get through Congress?
Well, you know that there are a range of executive actions we're concurrently looking at, right? We're looking at one on police reform. The president's certainly looking at steps he can take on student debt, and there are others we're looking at as well. But at the same time, we're also looking to get the Bipartisan Innovation Act through. We're looking to see what can be done on a range of issues where we feel there is bipartisan support, and we're continuing to engage closely with Democrats in Congress about a reconciliation package to lower costs for the American people. So we're doing both, and we're pursuing both paths. Go ahead.
On the police reform executive order, we reported in January
Yes.
that there was a draft of that executive order that was shared with stakeholders. It seemed like it was getting near to being issued. It's now May. Can you just explain what the delay is and what exact work is being done?
Yeah. Sure. I would say it was some good reporting on your part, and it was an early part of the process, and it takes months to get executive orders through the full legal and policy process, but it is still something the president has every intention of doing. We just haven't finalized it yet.
So can you specify what work is still being done on that executive order, what needs to happen at this point?
Policy and
or is
legal review process?
It doesn't have anything to do with not wanting to issue it before the midterms?
No.
And you were asked earlier this week, I think it was Monday, that on the president's phone call with Lopez Obrador.
Oh, yeah.
You were asked about whether or not he asked for an increase in troops on the Mexican southern border. And you said there's going to be ongoing conversations. I just wanted to follow up on that. Did the president ask anyone in the Mexican government or in that conversation for an increase of troops on the southern border?
No.
He has not.
He did not, and did not on that call. Go ahead.
So yesterday, going back to executive orders, yesterday the president met with a group of Democratic senators to discuss immigration, and Senator Menendez said today that one of the things they discussed was looking into executive actions that the president can take to provide relief to some immigrant families. I guess what are those actions? Can you give us a little bit more details on like what that meeting was like? What actions are there? Is the White House looking into, and kind of is there a timeline for that?
I don't have a timeline to preview for you. I would say that the president met with Senator Menendez and a group of senators, members of the CHC yesterday, as a continuing part of his engagement with different caucus groups from Congress, and there's a range of topics that's often discussed in these meetings. Of course, immigration, but they discuss a range of issues typically, and it's an opportunity for the president to hear, to listen, to understand what there's an opportunity to move forward, what there is not an opportunity to move forward. And we've said before, and he reiterated during this meeting, that we are certainly open to and looking at what executive actions could be taken on immigration and on that front, even though obviously passing a law through Congress would ensure that it was permanent.
And going to that, there is a group of bipartisan lawmakers that met today to discuss immigration reform. Has the president been in contact with them at all? Has he discussed kind of, what would he like to see in a bipartisan immigration legislation? I know he introduced his own kind of outline of what he would like to see in immigration legislation, but has he talked to any of these senators?
Well, he met with the CHC yesterday, and he met with the House CHC members just in the last couple of weeks, and certainly he's discussed with those pivotal members recently what he would like to see and his interest in moving an immigration bill forward. I would say the bill he put forward on his first day in office, he very much thinks could be a bipartisan bill. It includes smarter security, something everybody should support. It includes efforts to fix our asylum processing system, to protect DACA recipients. Those are all steps and components that have had bipartisan support in the past, so he continues to see that as a model.
Has he reached out to any Republican senators, Senator Tillis, Senator Cornyn, on this topic?
I don't have any individual calls or engagements to read out. I would just tell you that the fact that he put forward this bill his first day in office shows you how important he thinks this issue is, and he is open to working with anyone who wants to play a constructive role in fixing the broken immigration system. Go ahead, Karen.
Thanks, Jen. Our ABC poll with the Washington Post this week found that in the states where abortion restrictions have been passed in recent years, only 30% of residents in those states were actually aware of the restrictions. Yeah. What role does the White House have in raising awareness of those specific state restrictions? And what will you do about that in the coming months?
You know, Karen, I'm not sure that's the White House role, right? We obviously are in this moment now where the world, the country, is tuning into the fact that women's health care and women's basic rights, fundamental rights that have been the law for 50 years, could be at risk. And that will likely alert many Americans to that, as well as state laws in their own states, because there's more reporting and there's more talking about it. And certainly that's something we fit into and we engage with. But it will also be leaders and elected officials in these states that will continue to educate their public about this as well.
And just on a different topic, the country's closing in on a grim milestone of 1 million deaths from COVID. We saw the White House mark the 500,000 deaths in February. How will the president mark that milestone? Will he at the White House?
He certainly will. We look at the CDC as well as Johns Hopkins data. I know different media organizations track it differently, so just so you know how we track it from here. And once we hit this milestone, the president will certainly mark this incredibly somber moment. This moment will call on all of us to remember the tragedy of this number and the importance for all of us to act. That's what the president has done, standing up a historic vaccination program, investing in life-saving treatments and tools for the American people. And Americans have acted too by getting vaccinated and boosted. But we have more to do, and we can also honor those who have lost. I don't have anything to preview at this point in time, but he certainly will be marking it here. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Sweden has said that they have gotten security guarantees from the United States in case they decide to apply to join NATO. Can you maybe offer a comment and tell us whether those guarantees would apply to other countries willing to join NATO?
Well, our military...
That I ordered relief factor. I am now paying
even less protected. And the military is already grappling with trying to protect women and service members and their families from some of these really crazy far right-wing conservative social restrictions and laws, namely, the ones in Florida and Texas. The military is already looking at how do we take care of our military families who have transgender kids and are LGBTQ in order to protect them. So we're already seeing this, and the military now is going to have to look at, how do we protect women from these states where you're not going to be able to get basic health care. This is what we're seeing.
When you were here, we were talking about this fight that you've engaged in to make sure that people who believe in the rule of law and understand that a free and fair election resulted in a free and fair outcome, and that was the election of President Joe Biden, that those kinds of people are next secretaries of state. We talked about how that could be bipartisan if there were Republicans who saw the truth about 2020. When you see how, Roe versus Wade was decided with people nominated by conservative presidents and Democratic presidents. Casey, which affirmed that right to privacy, was there were conservatives and liberals who signed on to that decision. When you see this court rule, not even all of the people appointed by Republican presidents, at least in this draft, appear to be on board with this majority opinion. What are your thoughts about the stakes of the midterms and the 2024 election?
I think they're extremely high. Look, we have 3 Supreme Court justices appointed by a president who was not elected by the popular vote, who was impeached twice. And on top of that, you have a number of Supreme Court justices, even beyond that, who were appointed by presidents who were not elected by the popular vote. And again, this is example number 555 of why elections matter. And and I understand the frustration that many Democrats have with the fact that all of the agenda hasn't been able to be enacted, but my message is, what is the alternative?
Right.
You're looking right now at what the alternative could be. And make no mistake, it doesn't end with Roe v. Wade. I mean, this is just the beginning of this right-wing, Republican social agenda, and I'm afraid to say. And that's why I'm working so hard on this Secretary of State project, because that is the path that Donald Trump is going to get if he gets to the White House. And again, for me, it's about pro-democracy. It's just about counting the votes. But we got to make sure that we count the votes correctly.
Amy McGrath, thank you so much for spending some time with us on this today. A quick break for us. We will be right back.
Smarter wireless.
It's all you. Yeah. Without the performance to back it up. Take my wolf and
eliminates.
Congratulations on all the success, and you also say this is a lot.
Judiciary Committee for a long time, and we've seen senators on the committee now say that this is just more evidence that, these aren't informative or productive process if they're not willing to answer these questions. What does the president make of this kind of debate happening right now between the utility of the confirmation hearings?
I don't think the president, we have not seen a final opinion, and I don't think the president's going to weigh in on that. It may not even weigh in on that afterwards. But obviously, they will all be judged by what their comments were. Now, at the same time, the president, no one is questioning, including certainly not the president, as you noted, former chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, checks and balances or the legitimacy of the court. We are certainly not from here. As a former chair of the Judiciary Committee who has been steeped in these issues for decades, he disagrees with the reasoning behind this draft opinion profoundly, because it would throw the health care for millions of families into turmoil and would also threaten protections, as I noted, and that goes back to the precedent for a number of important cases that have determined who people have the right to marry, the privacy over contraception. Remember, it used to be that you wouldn't have the privacy of deciding to get contraception with your husband. Imagine how crazy that is. That's what we're talking about right now, these type of rights that the American people have. And he may strongly agree with the outcome or the final opinion of that, but he of course believes in the legitimacy of all three branches of government. Go ahead.
Jen, thank you. Yesterday, first of all, congratulations to both you and Karine.
I appreciate I'm getting congratulations. I guess it's so that I can sleep and read books, and I'm taking all of the recommendations. Huge congratulations, really, to Karine. Yes, thank you, though. Yes.
I have two questions. The first is, yesterday you were talking from the podium, the Fed chair during his press conference as well, about the strength of the economy, the possibility for a soft landing. Today, it's a little bit of a different story. The stock market is down more than 1,000 points. A CNBC survey shows 80% of small business owners see a recession in the next 12 months. So I'm wondering if the White House took note of the market rout today, and what, if anything, it signals about the health of the underlying economy.
Well, we don't judge the economy by the daily movement of the stock market. And that is true, has been true of most presidents and most White Houses in the past. We look at Main Street and not just Wall Street. I would note, just for fact's sake, that since President Biden took office, the stock market is up approximately 9%. I still think that's true as it closed. You can check me on that. But our focus, and the focus of many economists who look at this question of whether we're headed toward a recession, is on fundamental economic data, including the number of jobs that have been created, the growth of the GDP. Obviously, we have the unemployment rate at 3.6%, the biggest single-year drop in U.S. history. Household balance sheets are strong, and businesses are investing in the United States. And we even saw the high level of investment, even with the GDP numbers that we saw earlier this week, last week. We still saw high levels of business investment. So that's all the data we look at. That's the data most economists look at. We certainly understand that in terms of consumer confidence, and I don't know what this small business data looked at, it may be that people see costs, they see the stock market. We understand that when you're measuring people's emotions or people's reaction, that's what that captures. But we're still looking at the basic fundamentals, as are many economists on the outside, including Jason Furman and others. Go ahead.
One more question.
It's real, and it's causing a rise at an alarming rate.
Initially, the illness may include cold symptoms, fever, sore throat, pneumonia, diarrhea, or nausea.
The Mayo Clinic's Dr. Sarah Hassan says that when it starts attacking the liver, there are signs parents can watch for.
One of the most common things that we notice is yellowing around the eyes, or what we call sclerolicterus. Also yellowing of the skin, or what we call jaundice. And that's really important. That's kind of the telltale sign of that we're having liver disease. Another thing that's really
The U.S. Supreme Court, John Roberts, is calling the unprecedented leak of a Supreme Court draft opinion absolutely appalling. CNN was in the room as Roberts spoke out for the first time since Americans learned the High Court is poised to overturn Roe versus Wade. We want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And we begin with an urgent new operation to evacuate civilians trapped in the Mariupol steel plant, where conditions are growing more dire by the hour. CNN's Issa Suarez is following the battle for Mariupol from her post in western Ukraine for us. Issa, the UN now says another convoy is in fact heading to Mariupol. What more can you tell us?
Very good afternoon to you, Wolf. What we're hearing is that after 3 days of intense and very brutal shelling, that what we know and promises really by Russia to create these evacuation corridors, promises that, by the way, have been broken time and time again. The UN now telling us that a new evacuation operation is underway for those civilians that have been holed up inside the Azovstal steel plant for some 60 days. Ukrainian soldiers trapped in the Azovstal plant sing the army's battle hymn. It is sweeter for us to die in battle than to live in chains as dumb slaves, they sing in the darkness. A few of the dozens of Ukrainian fighters defending the last patch of Mariupol, not in Russian hands. Above them, the bombardment continues relentlessly. Later, one of the commanders with a message for the world. It's been the third day that the enemy has broken through the territory of Azovstal. Fierce, bloody combat is ongoing, he says, accusing the Russians of violating the promise of a truce and preventing the evacuation of civilians who continue to hide deep in bunkers at Azovstal. The UN and Red Cross organized the evacuation of one group of about 100 civilians at the weekend. Since then, none has left. Now there is hope of another convoy reaching Mariupol.
As we speak, a convoy is proceeding to get to Azovstal by tomorrow morning, hopefully to receive those civilians remaining in that bleak hell that they have inhabited for so many weeks and months, and take them back to safety.
Speaking to me earlier, the military governor of Donetsk was much more cautious.
Would like to be frank that with all due respect for the UN and their assistance and the International Committee of the Red Cross, the conditions that are such that the occupier keeps changing them.
The Russians and their allies, the separatists of the self-styled Donetsk People's Republic, are showing off their newly won territory, or at least the ruins they fought to seize. This commander points to a massive crater just outside the Azovstal plant. He says the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers are everywhere. We find more and more of them, he adds. Amid the ruins of Mariupol, once a thriving city of 400,000 people, the new authorities are changing the road signs into Russian. Ukrainian officials expect they will organize a parade on May 9th, when Russia celebrates its victory in the Second World War. Whether the Azovstal complex is quiet and emptied by then, or still being pulverized, no one knows. What's certain are the scars that will remain. And Wolf is worth remembering as we look at these images that this is not a video game, this is not a movie, there are no special effects. This is happening right now in Mariupol, in Ukraine, and there are civilians inside, some 200 civilians and some 30 children, Wolf.
It's heartbreaking just to think about it. Issa Suarez in Lviv for us. Issa, stay safe. We'll get back to you. Now let's go to eastern Ukraine, where the city of Kramatorsk is reeling from the first Russian missile strikes there in a month. CNN's senior international correspondent Sam Kiley got a close-up look at the damage.
Kramatorsk was hit overnight with at least 6 missiles. Now, they have had clearly a devastating impact. This is a pumping station sewage area. The size of the building would indicate that it was in no way could have housed any kind of military equipment.
I just got lucky. I went to the bathroom. I heard a bang. I sat down on the bed and it hit me, and all the furniture fell down.
But the scenes here are absolutely extraordinary. The way that these trees have been completely decapitated, torn to shreds. And the same goes also for these homes. Now, amazingly, very few people here, considering the scale of the damage, were injured and none were killed. There were 25 injured, 6 have been hospitalized, 1 is in a critical condition. And the reason for that is that at least 2/3 of the city of Kramatorsk have already left. But this, without any question, is yet another strike by the Russians on a civilian residential area.
Sam Kiley is joining us now live from Kramatorsk. Sam, what more are you seeing in this battle for eastern Ukraine, which is intense right now?
Well, at about 9 o'clock this evening, it's now in the small hours of the morning, there was another missile strike on the outskirts of the city. Only one, as far as we're aware, a substantial missile strike, though nonetheless we felt it a couple of kilometers distant from us. And I think that's just indicative of what is anticipated to be a substantial uptick in the Russian efforts to try to pound their way forwards in this battle for the East Wolf. They have not made the sort of progress that they had hoped to, very clearly. They are unable to capture towns like Liman, where we reported from, or close to just the other day. The line of artillery front line is really being held by the Ukrainians while they wait for the movement of the more sophisticated weapons that they've been promised by Ukraine, which they hope will be able to tip the balance in their favor. But everybody here is focused on this May 9th date, the Victory Day, the Second World War anniversary for Russia, in anticipation that maybe this would be a point at which the Russians would try to really concentrate for one last effort to capture what they have already said is their main aim, which is the whole of what they're calling the Donbass, and that includes the city that I'm in, Kramatorsk. Wolf?
Stay safe over there. Steve Kiley reporting for Sam Kiley. Thank you very much. Also tonight, we're told the Biden administration officials believe it's likely that Ukrainian forces have used U.S. intelligence to help them target Russian generals on the battlefield. Listen to the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby as he drills down on the intelligence the United States is and isn't sharing with Ukraine.
We do not provide intelligence on the location of senior military leaders on the battlefield or participate in the targeting decisions of the Ukrainian military. We do provide them useful intelligence, timely intelligence, that allows them to make decisions to better defend themselves against this invasion. And I think the less said about that, honestly, the better.
All right, joining us now, the former CIA Chief of Russia Operations, Steve Hall. He's now a CNN national security analyst. Steve, thanks for joining us. As someone who's obviously handled a lot of very sensitive intelligence yourself over the years, just how much would the U.S. like to avoid discussing this topic?
Well, Wolf, there's always a decision to be made as to whether or not to release information about intelligence sharing relationships and precisely what intelligence is being shared and how. And this particular administration, the Biden administration, has been very aggressive and forward-leaning with getting intelligence out there to everybody so that they can better understand what Russia is up against, or what we're up against and what the Ukrainians are up against in dealing with Russia. But this type of tactical intelligence, you know, where specific Russian generals are located, that's the sort of thing that I don't think either side wants to talk about. And I think Admiral Kelly got it exactly right when he said, look, this is something that we have a robust relationship. We can't talk too much about it. But I think it's best to think of intelligence as like providing weapons. It's a different kind of weapon. It helps the Ukrainians fight the invading forces of Russia.
Why has Ukraine been so successful so far at targeting Russian generals on the battlefield? They've killed a whole bunch of them.
I think it actually has less to do with the intelligence and more with the incompetence of the Russian military effort. I think there's been a lot of analysts who have been saying, I think correctly, that the structure of the Russian military it's not very flexible. They don't have a lot of battlefield decisions that are made right there by officers on the ground. A lot of times it has to go back to a more centralized command, which means that when there's a problem, Russian generals have to go solve it. And when they go solve a problem on the front, of course, they expose themselves to the possibility of being, injured or killed. And there's also a lot of morale and discipline issues. I mean, we've seen young Russian soldiers using their cell phones to call their girlfriends and their buddies, and that, of course, makes it extremely easy for the Ukrainian intelligence services to collect that information and use it for targeting purposes.
How does Russia view this U.S. intelligence sharing with Ukraine?
I'm sure they view it just like they view, again, the weapons transfers. That they see it as assistance that is being provided not just by the United States, mind you, but it's by, not only NATO allies either. It's really, Western democracies across the world are trying to help the Ukrainians, and that includes intelligence. And so I think that's very much how the Russians see it. They see it as similar to providing the sort of weaponry and other things that the Ukrainians need to rebuff the Russians, Wolf.
Steve Hall helping us appreciate what's going on. Thank you, Steve, very much. Just ahead, this week's Victory Day celebration in Moscow to launch a new phase of his war against Ukraine. I'll discuss that and more with the U.S. Ambassador to Russia. He joins me right after the break.
62 Falls in Aberdeen, 73 in Pierre and in Rapid City. Like the sound of warmer weather? Well, it's really going to kick in next week. Sioux Falls even has a shot at 80 degrees. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes.
Cinco de Mayo celebrations are well underway tonight.
What a local brewery is doing to mark the day and honor one of its employees. Next.
With Angus beef, melty.
Cut. You can't.
Only one station off.
Between now and then? What I'd say in Scott.
Secretary, good to see you again. I have
together a competent campaign plan that's sensible and that people are capable of executing properly within their limitations. Overly ambitious again. They're conducting an attack in the Donbass on 4 separate axes, once again, which they did entering the country at the beginning. The second thing is command and control. This centralized old Soviet model of command and control doesn't work well on a fluid battlefield with all the technology that we have on the battlefield today. So people understand, the American military, we're not fighting a battle like that. We put a plan together, and then our subordinate leaders at the junior level make decisions based on what the enemy's doing. They don't have to ask permission. They just act because they're in a difficult situation. The other thing, they reorganized the Russian military into these battalion tactical groups that everybody's been hearing about. In doing that, they gave away the regimental and brigade headquarters above them, which would normally control about 5 of them, and they're gone. So they fight these units individually with no one providing reconnaissance for them. They don't have the artillery that they should have, and they never mass them together because they don't have the capability to do it. Their logistics has failed miserably again.
Quickly, General, the question I get time and time again is how does this end, and how does Putin have an off-ramp in this thing?
Well, May 9th may tell us a little bit, because that's a celebratory day in Russia's World War II to defeat of Nazism. He could begin to take a victory on that day based on the territory he owns, Mariupol. That is why he's attacking Mariupol. He's willing to take the casualties, by the way, now. Remember, they were going to starve them out? 9 May's coming. They want that done by 9 May so they can celebrate, actually in Mariupol as well as in Moscow. Claim that, claim Kherson, and that oblast, which is kind of like a province, politicize that, make it an independent place. The Donbass they have, maybe extend that a little bit. They've gained some territory, but not much. So, and I think Transnistria in Moldova will also come into play as something that they politicize as an independent republic. That is something, but it's a far cry from where he was. I think they have to come to the realization that actually occupying a significant amount of territory in Ukraine is likely not going to happen. The Ukrainians, they have an opportunity here to push the Russians out. They're going to need significant amount of support. In my calculation, just on artillery alone, because the Russians, the one thing they do well is artillery, and the thing that kills artillery is artillery. We're going to have to send them a lot to be able to do that, a lot more than we've already sent any other nations. There is opportunity there. But at the end of the day, it'll be probably likely that there'll be some kind of stalemate, hopefully with the Ukrainians taking back most of their territory. The opportunity is there for them to do it.
Could be a long time. General Keane, as always, thank you.
Yeah, it's great seeing you.
You too. Up next, Amber Heard talks about domestic violence during her marriage to Johnny Depp. We'll have a report about all that.
I was trying to get through to him. I was trying to say to him in some way that it was me.
And this ongoing debate about student debt. Later, the teacher who says she was fired because of that Florida anti-speech don't say gay law. And we're going to break down why Republicans actually are not leaning into the story that Nicole and I were just discussing, a draft opinion to overturn Roe v. Wade, a 30-year-plus march by the right that now they don't want to talk about. And the reporter who broke that story for Politico is my special guest tonight. Stay with us.
New Polygrip Power.
And community.
Oh, Mexico, it's celebrated with parades, food, dancing. It is a huge celebration, you know, so there is a lot of pretty much the same thing, probably in a larger scale, but we can still do the smaller scale items.
In Hartford, Sarah McDonald, KELO News.
The event goes from 5 to 9 tonight. For more details, we've posted a link with this story on KELOLand.com.
Well, it's a sign that summer is almost here as the Levitt at the Falls announces its concert lineup. The powerhouse soul band, The Burros, will be the first performance on June 3rd. The lawn opens at 6:30 with music starting at 7. There will be 50 free concerts all summer long, every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It will also include opening acts by local performers and food vendors. We'll have a closer look at what's ahead this summer coming up at 6. The National Retail Federation says Mother's Day spending is expected to total $31.7 billion. That's up $3.6 billion from last year. Now, a big reason for the increase, everything from flowers to jewelry, of course, costs more. In addition to more traditional gifts, the Federation says there's an uptick in the number of consumers seeking experience gifts like concert or sporting events tickets.
Well, what can you say about today? It wasn't as windy.
Oh, there you go. Way to find the silver lining.
Something positive,
yeah. Nicely done.
I guess in the western part of the state, they saw sunshine all day.
Nice and sunny out west.
Well, Jay's working on that 7-day forecast.
First, here's a look at those local stocks.
It was just a great experience overall, everything.
With the Russian government on, but apart from that, very little other contact. NASA still has engagement with Roscosmos on the operations of the International Space Station, but compared to even 6 months ago, Wolf, the level of engagement is greatly diminished.
After the release of the American Trevor Reed from Russian custody just last week, where do the talks stand now on freeing these two other detained Americans? We're talking about Brittany Griner, the WNBA basketball star, and Paul Whelan, himself a former U.S. Marine.
Sure. No, my colleagues and I at the embassy spend a lot of our time dedicated to keeping track not only of Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner, but the other Americans, and there are a number of others who are detained here in Russia. Some of them are not in the Moscow area, and it's difficult for us to physically get access to them. But every American here gets close attention from this embassy. Paul Whelan, of course, has. Trevor Reed did. I spent a lot of time working on Trevor's case from when he was, first detained through his ultimate release recently. And it was quite a working on these cases, Wolf, has been probably the most challenging, emotionally challenging in my experience as ambassador. I've gotten close to the Whelan and the Reed families. I've gotten to know Paul and Trevor well. I've spent more time in Russian prisons and labor camps than I ever imagined I would. Unfortunately, Brittany Griner, within the last several months, has joined the roster of wrongfully detained Americans here, and we're working very hard on her case to gain her release. But if I could give you one example when I say how what an impact this work has had on me, if I could recount for you just a story about Trevor and his detention here. He was actually in pretrial detention in Moscow, and I was visiting with him. This is probably a year and a half ago, and we were sitting in a dingy greeting area where the inmates are allowed to meet with visitors. We had a glass partition between us, and we were talking about his legal case and his family and things he needed. And out of the blue, Wolf, he just looked at me and he said, "Sir, I want you to know one thing. I'll never do anything to embarrass the United States." And I was thunderstruck that out of the blue, after this is at a point where he'd been detained for a year.
Wow.
He didn't know how much longer he was going to stay in prison in Russia. And that's the way he was thinking. He wanted to reassure me. I was there to reassure him. He wanted to reassure me that he would never do anything to embarrass the United States. And I've told this to his parents, and I wanted to tell you and your viewers
Thank you.
that the Reed family, the United States Marine Corps, produced one heck of an American in Trevor Reed.
Yep, you're absolutely right. The U.S. Ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, thanks for all your work. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
And coming up, another urgent operation is now underway to evacuate civilians, men, women, and children from the Mariupol steel plant. A key Red Cross official is standing by to discuss what's going on. Stay with us. You're in The Situation.
Verizon.
Virus, and it is now covered by most insurances up to the age of 45. I can't stress the human papillomavirus vaccine enough.
Are there any other just typical problems that you've seen that maybe to be aware of, or something that a teen can look out for to make sure that they're maintaining their health?
Yeah, so I think what people don't realize is your menstrual cycle can be a sign of disease. It can be actually a vital sign. So just like a fever or a high blood pressure that would indicate a disease process, your menstrual cycle abnormalities can clue us into something going on.
Is there anything of note you think it's important for a parent that just had a teen that told them that they just got their period to know or to be aware of moving forward?
Like I said before, I think creating a positive environment, being the person who educates your child on the changes of their body is important, so you establish a trusting relationship to talk about different challenging topics that are going to come up over the next couple of years about sexual health.
And for more information on reproductive health, head over to avera.org/medical minute. And we'll be right back.
The only news in primetime, Dakota.
It's fair to say that there's nothing that's on the table. So we have to be creative.
What makes best reviews the best review?
The opioid epidemic that has been linked to 500,000 deaths in the U.S. over the past 2 decades. Fox 25 in Oklahoma City as several tornadoes and flash floods tear through Texas and Oklahoma yesterday. A school, a marijuana farm, and several structures were damaged. No injuries reported there. And this is a live look at Rochester, New York. One of the big stories there tonight, Ms. Pac-Man alongside Dance Dance Revolution. Ocarina of Time, Zelda game, and Sid Meier's Civilization inducted into Rochester's World Video Game Hall of Fame. Ms. Pac-Man was released in 1981. Remember that? One of the best-selling arcade games of all time. I played it. Did you? That's a nice live look outside the Beltway. From Special Report, we'll be right back.
It's beautiful. Mom worked as a waitress until she was 73 to help pay for our college, even helped with loan repayment. Loan forgiveness, just another insult to those who play by the rules. Now, again, I mentioned this is a valid policy debate, and I quote that because one can understand how Miss Ingram and her mother might feel, because there is this idea of you take out a loan, you pay it back. How important is it for this debate to also include the facts that companies and other entities can take out bankruptcy for those loans, and often do? The former president benefited from the bankruptcy laws and told everyone that that's a good thing if you need it. And yet under current law, you don't have that option, so you're saddled with this forever, not to mention that someone of Miss Ingram's mother's age would have a much, much lighter load than what young people are facing today.
Well, you're absolutely right, Ari. Like, either we start to pay attention to how to give people relief from unfair debt, or what we're really doing is lining the pockets of corporations. But let's just, because I just want to unpack this notion that people are somehow undeserving and just scamming taxpayers, because that's simply untrue. So let's just take one example, Larry Hennings. Now, this is a white man, Minnesota, decides to go back to school, wants to go to law school. His wife gets cancer. He drops out. Well, he has a $60,000 debt. He pays back $53,000 of it, but he still owes $117,000. So tell me how that's about scamming taxpayers. That's about people becoming and falling victim to just unfair practices.
Yeah. Maya Wiley, good to see you as always. Thank you for joining us. Let me tell folks what's coming up, because we were down at the Supreme Court, as Nicole and I were discussing. We've been reporting on the leaked opinion here to overturn Roe v. Wade. For the last 2 days on this program, we have not discussed the leak itself that much, but we turned to that with the reporter who broke the story and why the right seems to be more concerned about the leak than the ruling. Stay with me.
To support a strong immune system,
A court hearing wrapping up in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin just minutes ago. The defendant, a 14-year-old accused of killing 10-year-old Lily Peters. That teen appearing at the hearing via video link from a nearby jail. And NewsNation correspondent Kelly Beeson has followed this case from the very start. Kelly, what did we learn from today's hearing? Well, Nicole, while the name of the juvenile suspect in this case is not being released, we now know his next court date has been set for the end of June. The status conference will be conducted with the defendant and his new representation, Wisconsin attorney Michael Cohen, appearing virtually. So the big question now is, will the suspect be tried as an adult or a juvenile?
She was just a sweet, innocent little girl. There needs to be some type of justice here.
It's a case that sent shockwaves through a tight-knit town in northwest Wisconsin. A 14-year-old stands accused of sexually assaulting and murdering 10-year-old Lily Peters, a little girl who never returned home from a visit to her aunt's house. Her body was discovered north of the Chippewa Falls residence in the woods.
It is almost impossible to believe that something this horrific could happen in our city.
Shortly after that discovery, authorities took a 14-year-old known to Lily into custody. He remains behind bars at $1 million bond. He's been charged with first-degree intentional homicide, first-degree sexual assault, and first-degree sexual assault of a child under the age of 13.
Wisconsin law mandates that anyone over 10 that commits a murder, that is charged with a murder, start in adult court.
Rachel Fizet is a criminal lawyer who says there are several factors that come into play regarding whether he's tried as an adult or a juvenile.
Whether it's good for the community.
Tonight, tightened security around the Supreme Court in the wake of the draft majority opinion as Chief Justice John Roberts makes his first public appearance since the leak. New 8-foot fencing goes up around the Supreme Court. The new intelligence tonight about possible violence against the justices. Plus, the next battle over the abortion pill and our exclusive interview with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
This is about controlling women. This is about turning the clock back.
Wall Street fall. Stocks plummet over inflation fears and rising interest rates. What does it mean for your wallet? And what should you do if you're close to retirement? New tornado threat. 48 million Americans in the path of severe storms. Tonight's other top headline, the bloody battle for control of Mariupol. Breaking news as the FDA restricts the J&J vaccine. The concerning health alert about some blood pressure medications and a bad interaction with ibuprofen. Civilians inside Trump's Oval Office. Our 60 Minutes interview with former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. The tense standoff.
I just turn squarely around to him, face him, and say, I don't have 250,000 troops to send on some ridiculous mission to the border.
And a field of dreams for a young Yankees fan. The special moment between fans of two rival teams.
This is the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday night. And as we come on the air tonight, public protests are spreading across the nation following the leaked draft decision from the Supreme Court that would end federal protection of abortion rights. While the demonstrations have been mostly peaceful so far, there is growing concern about potential violence leading up to the official ruling. Fences have gone up around the Supreme Court as crowds are expected to grow in the days and weeks ahead. And CBS News has learned that the justices themselves have been given extra security while several justices have canceled upcoming public appearances. CBS News sat down with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who called the opinion incredibly dangerous and warned that more could be at risk than just abortion rights. We'll have more of our interview with Secretary Clinton in just a moment, but first, CBS's Ed O'Keefe will start us off from the White House. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Nora. That draft majority opinion on the future of abortion rights continues to reverberate nationwide, and now there are growing concerns about the potential for political violence against the Supreme Court justices themselves. The Supreme Court under lockdown. 8-foot-high fencing now surrounds the building. All entry points are blocked to vehicles. And more officers on patrol. A scene reminiscent of what Washington looked like after the January 6th attacks. The 9 justices are also under heavier security. CBS News has learned general threats of violence against them are up. Their home locations have been shared online, and they're receiving more targeted personal phone threats. Justice Samuel Alito, author of the leaked majority draft opinion, canceled a scheduled appearance today in Nashville. The other justices are also cutting back on public events.
The risk is real. The U.S. Marshal Service is there to provide protection for judges in the federal judiciary, but it's not enough.
Chief Justice John Roberts addressed the leak today, calling it absolutely appalling and called the leaker foolish. But the fallout has only intensified. In Illinois, surrounded by 5 states set to restrict abortion services, clinics are trying to prepare for a flood of new patients.
If every state that touches Illinois suddenly has no access, we project even up to a 5 times increase in patient demand, especially at our health centers that border other states.
Many of those out-of-state patients would be seen virtually and sent abortion pills, but those are also in jeopardy. At least 17 states have now introduced legislation to ban or restrict access to the pills. Michigan's Democratic Attorney General Dana Nessel worries it could happen in her state.
Whether it's by medication, whether it's surgical, it doesn't matter. Abortion will be illegal in our state, period.
Meanwhile, here at the White House, plans for a new press secretary. Karine Jean-Pierre is set to become the first black person, first openly gay person to serve in the role. She's set to succeed Jen Psaki, who's stepping down next Friday. Nora?
Ed O'Keefe, thank you. Earlier today, we sat down with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for her first interview since that leaked draft opinion. She says the consequences of overturning Roe v. Wade would go beyond abortion rights.
This is about controlling women. This is about turning the clock back on half the population of our country.
In the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump made it clear he would nominate justices who would overturn Roe versus Wade. Did you imagine it would happen this quickly?
I warned about it in the campaign. I could see that the man I was running against would literally do anything to get the votes of the extreme faction of the Republican Party who were willing to totally upend precedent and deny women their rights. So I did warn about it, but you know, it's hard to warn in the abstract. And I think a lot of people would say, well, that'll never happen. No, but nobody will do that. This opinion is dark. It is incredibly dangerous, and it is not just about a woman's right to choose. It is about much more than that. And I hope people now are fully aware of what we're up against, because the only answer is at the ballot box to elect people who will stand up for every American's rights. And any American who says, look, I'm not a woman, this doesn't affect me, I'm not black, that doesn't affect me, I'm not gay, that doesn't affect me. Once you allow this kind of extreme power to take hold, you have no idea who they will come for next.
It was nearly 30 years ago when Hillary Clinton famously said that phrase. And today it's led to this, the opening of the first ever global embassy for women. Elise Nelson is the president and CEO of the nonpartisan Vital Voices.
It's certainly not lost on me that we're opening the doors to this global embassy for women's leadership, at the same time that the rights that, quite frankly, I was born into are now being rolled back. I think we need a global embassy because we need permanence. If you look around, there are so few places for women to gather.
On the walls, portraits of groundbreaking women, including her friend Madeleine Albright, the first female Secretary of State.
And I know you're thinking of Madeleine Albright on this day.
Well, Madeleine and I we're the co-founders of Vital Voices all those years back, and it started as a dream that we could create a group that would keep the emphasis on women's issues and women's rights going forward.
It's 2022.
Yes, it is.
Why are there still so few women in leadership positions in politics?
It is so difficult to be in the public arena as a woman, and there is a double standard. Let's be very clear about that. Women are judged much more harshly. To sustain the continuing pressure of being a woman in the public arena, you have to believe you're doing it for something bigger than just yourself.
And we will have more of our interview tomorrow on CBS Mornings and on CBSNews.com. There is some breaking news tonight regarding the safety of a popular COVID vaccine. The news comes as the
mount an effective immune response.
And tonight, health officials also reporting more people are turning to the drug Paxlovid, its use up tenfold in recent weeks. But now a team of scientists is investigating some reports of a relapse in COVID symptoms in patients who took the antiviral drug. Paxlovid, which can cut the risk of hospitalization by nearly 90%, is for people with mild to moderate COVID symptoms at high risk of severe disease. John Donahue says he, his wife, and mother-in-law all saw their COVID symptoms dramatically reduced after taking the pills.
After about another 5 days, we started having symptoms again, all three of us. We had another 5 days or so of feeling ill, where we tested positive.
Donahue says the second time around, the symptoms were milder. The CDC says the reports of relapse are a reminder that anyone who develops symptoms of illness during or after isolation should remain isolated, masked, and seek out testing in clinical care. For patients who get recurrent COVID symptoms, the FDA says there is no need to take more Paxlovid. Tonight, many health experts remain confident in the drug's benefits.
The main thing is Paxlovid is to prevent progression to severe disease, hospitalization, and death, and it does that.
All right, that's the news on Paxlovid. In the meantime, let's get back to Whit Johnson. I want to go right back to the news from the FDA late today, just before we came on now, limiting the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, saying to get Pfizer or Moderna if you can instead, pointing to this risk of rare blood clots. But I've got to think about all the people out there, Whit, who are asking themselves, so I got this many, many months ago. Should I be concerned?
Exactly, David. Millions of Americans got the J&J vaccine, and while there is a low risk of blood clots, that's only been seen in the short term, the days and weeks after the shot. Health officials have been recommending the other vaccines for months now because they don't carry the same level of risk, but this is the furthest they've gone in actually limiting access to J&J. David.
All right, Whit Johnson on the breaking news tonight. Whit, thank you. To the economy tonight in the stock market, the Dow plunging today just 24 hours after the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to slow down the economy and inflation in this country. The market falling steeply today, the Dow closing down more than 1,000 points, losing more than 3%. But yesterday, the markets, right after the Fed raised those rates, jumped. The stock market shooting up. Economists had said that the markets jumped because they had factored in the Fed interest rate hike, that they knew it was coming. Well, what happened today? Let's bring in our chief business and economics correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis. Rebecca, how did folks on Wall Street explain the plunge then today?
Well, David, as one Wall Street veteran put it to me, this U-turn is reality setting in. Reality is inflation is at historic highs. The jobs market is strong. And in order to stabilize prices, the Fed has to continue hiking interest rates, which can ultimately slow down the economy. And the stock market has responded. So far this year, the S&P 500, which is what's in most 401ks, is down about 13.5%, meaning if you put $1,000 into the market at the start of this year, today you'd have about $865. Keep in mind, there should be more volatility ahead, but you also have to remember history. Since 1980, the stock market has returned on average 9% a year, which is why you have to be in it for the long term. David?
Yeah, historical norms, but it's tough to stomach when you're watching it go up and down. Rebecca Jarvis with us again tonight. Thank you, Rebecca. We move on tonight to the deeply personal debate over abortion rights across this country. Fences going up at the Supreme Court, workers tightening security around the court with a 12-foot tall fence standing around the perimeter now. Tonight, the White House and Senate Democrats working to make Roe versus Wade federal law now. They know they don't have the votes, but they want every senator on record. And what about moderate Republicans Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins? Senator Collins, who once said she was convinced Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch would not overturn Roe versus Wade. Here's Rachel Scott again tonight.
Tonight, metal fencing now up, protecting the highest court in the land. But still a flood of demonstrators showed up at the steps. Senate Democrats are now vowing to hold a vote on legislation that would make a woman's right to obtain an abortion a federal law, codifying the Roe decision.
Republicans will not be able to hide from the horror they've unleashed on America.
Only 2 Republican senators support abortion rights. One of them is Senator Susan Collins. She voted for Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, convinced they would not overturn Roe.
So a good judge will consider it as precedent of the United States Supreme Court, worthy as treatment of precedent like any other.
And one of the important things to keep in mind about Roe v. Wade is that it has been reaffirmed many times over the past 45 years.
At the time, Collins said she was given assurances.
He noted that Roe had been reaffirmed 19 years later by Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and that it was precedent on precedent. He said it should be extremely rare that it be overturned, and it should be an example.
So you have obviously full confidence.
I do.
But that draft opinion indicates both Gorsuch and Kavanaugh will vote to overturn Roe after all. Collins now says that's completely inconsistent with what they told her privately. Collins supports codifying Roe versus Wade as a federal law, but today she declared she will not support the Democrats' bill because it goes too far.
My goal is to codify what is essentially existing law. That means Roe v. Wade, and it means keeping the conscience protections, which appear to be wiped out by the Democratic version.
But Lisa Murkowski, the other Republican senator supporting abortion rights, says she is now willing to take another look at what Democrats are offering.
Rachel Scott with us from the Supreme Court tonight. And Rachel, Senate Democrats are determined to have a vote now on this bill next week. Of course, as you've reported here, they want to get all senators on record. You've also reported they don't have the votes. And so let's ask about Senators Collins and Murkowski. We learned from your reporting tonight that they have supported the idea of making Roe versus Wade federal law. So I guess the question would be, would Democrats consider joining them?
Well, David, even though some Democrats support that, they do not want to take that path right now. They have not completely ruled it out, though. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the Senate will continue to vote on legislation to codify Roe versus Wade. But even with the support of 2 Republicans, Collins and Murkowski, they still do not have the votes they need in order to get that passed, David.
Rachel Scott at the Supreme Court tonight. Rachel, thank you. Now to the severe weather threat for millions of Americans tonight. The tornado watch from Texas to Louisiana.
And the door opens up and he's waving a document in his hands and he says something like, "Secretary, you're not going to believe this." And that's when he explains to me that, yes, they were working, that we had developed a plan, initial concept of how this might happen. And I was just flabbergasted that not only was the idea proposed, but that people in my department were working on it.
What would have been the implications if we had sent 250,000 active duty U.S. troops to the border?
It's just so absurd. I can't even consider it. I mean, again, we don't have 250,000 troops to send to the border. And to do what? It's just ridiculous.
Whatever happened to that plan?
Well, it died. I gave General Milley specific instruction to tell Northern Command, to stop working on it, to cease and desist, and that if anybody had any questions, you tell them they should call me direct. And I never got a phone call.
It was dead.
It was dead, and it died, as it should.
Well, when reached by CBS News, Stephen Miller declined to comment. We'll have more of my interview with former Defense Secretary Mark Esper on tomorrow's CBS Evening News and Sunday night on 60 Minutes. Well, still ahead here on tonight's CBS Evening News, millions in the path of dangerous storms, including tornadoes. We're tracking the severe weather. And researchers warn against mixing ibuprofen with some blood pressure medications.
A century to the 30s and before, that if you don't have a strong free world led by America to push back and uphold the sanctity of the laws we put in place to keep the world peaceful, it instead gets dominated by the likes of Putin and Xi and Iran. And unfortunately, I think if we had done much of what my father argued years ago, we might not be where we are today.
Listen, we miss him every day. His words, please give our best to your mom. I do potentially have a seat at the panel if you ever feel like.
Thank you, Brett. I would love to. We're dealing with a lot in my family, but my mother and I want to thank you and Suzanne Scott and everyone at Fox for continuing my father's legacy with this scholarship, and we wish all the greatest luck and our congratulations to Amit and Grace. And we are very excited to see what they do with these paths of learning they've embarked on.
Oh, it's great to see you too. Thanks. Up next, the panel on how today's tanking stock markets and tomorrow's jobs report
in there. So I'm glad that Chief Justice Roberts confirmed that it's authentic, because it certainly seemed that way to us. But, there's a reason that it's so strident in the tone, and that's because the task at hand, which is overturning Roe v. Wade, a precedent that is now almost a half century on the books. If you're going to do that under the sort of framework that most of these justices approach cases, you have to build up a head of steam. You don't just say, well, I noticed this is a little off and that's a little off, so chuck it in the waste bin. That's not the way the Supreme Court normally operates, and it certainly doesn't on very high-profile cases where people don't expect it to. So I think Alito's rhetoric here is amped up for a reason, and that's to basically ridicule the Roe opinion in such a way that it becomes easier to knock the legs out from under it. So that's the task that he seems to be embarked on. It's also another reason why it's very hard to see Chief Justice John Roberts joining this opinion if it looks anything like it does right now. There's just language in there about,
If the right is winning, why aren't they acting like it?
Well, I think that's because there's a disconnect between their policy priority here and public sentiment. I mean, what we're seeing now is a classic sort of two-tiered messaging strategy where they believe that the Republican base is getting the message that we're on the verge of overturning Roe versus Wade, which is something that's been a project of the conservative legal movement now for probably more than 40 years. But they recognize that there may be a price to pay, let's say, in November, perhaps with moderate voters, especially moderate women, GOP voters. They could have some problems. Does it harken back to some bad feelings about extreme views under President Trump and perhaps disrupt what they think is a victory coming this fall? So if I had to guess, they're looking at some poll numbers and getting some advice from the messaging strategists that, your voters know you're doing the right thing. No need to make too much out of this Supreme Court Roe versus Wade stuff.
Really interesting from two experts in the thick of it. My thanks to both of you. When we come back, an update out of Florida.
Does it push them away from the ability to maybe shell Kharkiv more effectively?
Yes, it does, because what it does is it takes the Russian artillery out of range from Kharkiv, so they can't hit civilian targets as well as they were able to just a few days ago. So this is critically important, and moving the Russian artillery back saves civilian lives, saves Ukrainian soldiers' lives as well. On the subject of maybe Ukrainians making more gains there, we're told by people on the ground that the howitzer systems that the Ukrainians are getting, they're getting up to speed on this, are going to be crucial for them to make even more gains in the east. Why is that? That's because the radar systems associated with the howitzers are critical. What they can do is they can actually find where Russian artillery is firing at the Ukrainians, and then they can target that artillery and attack it and eliminate it from the battlefield. It's incredible. They can actually hit the area that's firing at them. The very battery that's firing at them, they can hit when that system is up. All right. Well, Wolf, we're going to toss it back to you with the final thought about Mariupol. Colonel Layton, you said that this is kind of a Pyrrhic victory, right, for the Russians, even if they take the town. That's right, because there's not much left. It's basically well over 90% destroyed, Brian, and the real problem here is it's going to be one of the areas that is going to be nothing left, and it's going to be absolutely zero capability there. And Wolf, as we toss back to you, what's going to be crucial in the next few days when the Russians finally kind of take that steel plant, to see the kind of casualties that come out of there. It's almost unknowable at this point.
It's heartbreaking just to think about it. Guys, thank you very, very much. Ryan Todd, Cedric Layton, Colonel Cedric Layton, appreciate it very, very much. There's more breaking news we're following tonight. The Food and Drug Administration has just imposed.
I can't stress the human papilloma virus.
Stop. Be ready for every moment with
the best deal. Using Ideal Agent with
photos of Katie Hill, allegations of an affair with a staffer. She was forced to resign, yet they're circling the wagons, or I wouldn't say they're circling the wagons, but Madison Cawthorn may just survive.
Yeah, I mean, I do, all kidding aside, think there's a really interesting issue here of whether there is a double standard, whether that will pertain. We're obviously seeing many more women being involved in politics, having high-profile positions in public life, generally speaking. With that, there are going to be more instances, I assume, of women being caught in, let's say, unorthodox relationships of one kind or another. How will the public react? There have been female politicians with similar accusations and have survived. Nikki Haley
in South Carolina.
Is a good example of that. But I think this is something that is still in flux in our culture right now. It is going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and I think it was Meghan McCain who made the point that if Lynn Cheney, for example, had been caught in a similar situation, she would have never survived, and she would have been run out of the party. She's already been run out of the party, but for different reasons. Okay, Nicole, so a backsliding of ethics perhaps here in Washington. That's not a news story, but a lot to chew on today and over the course of the next couple of weeks. Nicole?
Yeah, certainly lots to keep an eye on. Vic, Niall, thank you both.
Yeah.
All right, here's a head scratcher. Facebook's so-called metaverse is supposed to be virtual, right? Well, they just opened a physical store. So what can you buy there? We'll explain after the break.
I'm Alex. The economy, listening to the administration talk about it, there is a disconnect.
Very much so. And first of all, I just miss Charles Krauthammer so much. Yeah. And I wish I'd gone to medical school so I could be better at this. Inflation was already eating away everybody's paychecks, and now inflation and the stock market are eating away at their retirement savings. And for this president, the litany of worsts keeps getting worser. I mean, we already had the worst inflation in 40 years, worst gas prices on record, worst crime wave since the 1990s, worst border crisis in American history. Now we can add to that the worst labor shortage in American history, 11.5 record.
And Lanzalato got to meet Judge. The slugger signed the ball, gave the boy a pair of batting gloves, and on top of that, the two families were invited to the Bronx for a future game, a moment proving it's okay to cry in baseball. That's awesome. I was reading and looking at the pictures at the same time. Be right back.
This portion of the CBS Evening News.
A new digital backdrop?
Yep, totally. I'm definitely not in Vegas.
Virtually every political campaign since, and it will certainly apply this year, and it will apply in 2024. It's a challenge. It's a big challenge for this president. Inflation is not something that he can just bring down unilaterally. He likes to blame the war in Ukraine and COVID, and I think that economists would back him up in saying that those are certainly having an impact. But he owns the economy. He owns the governing right now, and it's certainly something that Republicans are going to hammer him about in the midterms and after that.
Yeah, Guy, we talk a lot about different issues, and obviously the abortion issue rose to the top this week with that leaked draft opinion. But it really is the economy.
Right, and we have a very short attention span collectively in our society these days. What you're not going to lose sight of is how much you're paying every single day for gas, for groceries, and that sort of thing. And to your point about abortion, which is clearly at the forefront of our discussion right now, I think the Democrats who might be banking on that to be sort of the savior issue for them, it might be some wish casting, some wishful thinking there. Looking at the new Fox News polling, yes, most people support retaining Roe versus Wade, but also support pretty substantial restrictions on abortion that Democrats typically don't want to talk about. Hence your exchange yesterday with Congressman from Ohio who did not want to really tackle that question that you put to him because it's thorny for the other side of this equation as well.
One of the races we're following closely is the Pennsylvania Senate race. Let's take a listen to the debate from last night.
I've been America first my entire life. President Trump endorsed me, calling me America first. He knows what you should know, which is that I love this country.
People naturally pivot towards Democrats who won't solve your problem, but they will cut you a check. And that is how we're on this path where we find ourselves on the road to serfdom. So we need to get America first.
We know we want to send an America first senator to Washington, not a squish, because we know that's how we're losing our country to the radical left.
I mean, after J.D. Vance's win, you can't get more Trumpy on that stage, I don't think, Mark. This is your race. I asked everybody to pick one. Sure. What do you think?
Yeah, in the prism of the Ohio Senate race, if I was David McCormick, I'd be sweating. Donald Trump picked somebody who was not a leading candidate, who was in third or fourth place with 10% of the 10% of this vote, and catapulted him over the top into first place. Before Trump's endorsement, McCormick was leading Oz by 9 points in the March 3 Fox News poll. He's now up 2.5% in the RCP average ahead of him. So it's not the 23 points that J.D. Vance got, but it's a bump, and in a divided field, it could be the decisive factor.
And worth noting that McCormick is supported by a bunch of former President Trump's former advisors, so
including his wife, Dina Powell. Jeff, your race?
My race is the Georgia governor's race. Also interesting with the Trump angle. The former president is supporting Senator Perdue against Governor Kemp. Governor Kemp, however, is really way ahead in the polls, both in the primary and in an election or for the general against Stacey Abrams. He's got a lot of money. Stacey Abrams also has a lot of money, although she's spending a lot of money. And former Senator Perdue apparently is considering dipping into his own fortune to make up for that cash change.
And J.D. Vance 32%, Purdue 32%. The difference is the field isn't divided.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Your race, Guy?
I'm looking ahead to the general. I'm looking at the Florida governor's race. I don't think that the outcome is necessarily in doubt. I think the incumbent there is in pretty good shape, Ron DeSantis. But the margin there could be very interesting in a general election statewide as we start to, dare I say, look even further past 2022. I've got my eye on this one.
You think DeSantis is laying the groundwork?
I think he might be. I think he is building a reputation and a record, and a big win down in Florida could really put some wind in his sails.
He's absolutely laying the groundwork.
Yeah,
I mean, 100%.
You see the evidence.
Hectic. It seems every day is different. You never know when news can change your family's plans or affect their safety. Dakota News Now brings you real.
Here's the evening planner. First of all, for the Sioux Falls area, clouds. There could be a little drizzle here and there, but mainly just cloudy, 57 now. And not dropping off too much through the evening hours, 50 by 10 o'clock and staying there at midnight. In Aberdeen, there's been a little...
And making your day a little easier. every weekday from 5 to 7.
Can't wait until 10 o'clock for the news? Get your late news when you want it. Dakota News Now at 9 on Fox Sioux Falls. It's the area's only local newscast in primetime. Join Brian Allen and Andrea Anderson for a full hour of news that matters. Meteorologist Phil Schreck and Tyler Roney help you plan ahead with a first alert forecast. And Mark Ovenden has your first look at the night sports action. You don't have to wait until 10 o'clock for your late local news. Dakota News Now at 9 on Fox Sioux Falls. Catch Dakota News Now at 9 on Fox Sioux Falls. It's news when you want it.
Tonight, Russia's push to crush the last Ukrainian resistance in Mariupol. A Ukrainian commander saying bloody battles are raging at the steel plant where hundreds of civilians remain trapped. And our exclusive report, how U.S. intelligence helped Ukraine sink Russia's flagship in the Black Sea. Also news on First Lady Jill Biden, the visit she's planning to the Ukraine border. Also tonight, the worst day for stocks in nearly 2 years, the Dow dropping more than 1,000 points after that Fed rate hike. Terrifying images from a tornado outbreak in Texas and Oklahoma, the new threat we're tracking tonight. Security ramping up at the Supreme Court, an 8-foot fence installed as protests grow over that leaked draft that would overturn Roe v. Wade, and a new battleground, abortion pills by mail. New COVID concerns after the U.S. surpasses 1 million deaths, the troubling new projections, the White House shakeup, the historic new pick for press secretary, the dramatic testimony Amber Heard detailing abuse allegations against ex-husband Johnny Depp in his defamation suit against her, and chasing his dream of running a 100-mile race, the ultra-marathoner inspiring America.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. Tonight we are getting an up-close look at the relentless Russian assault on the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, Ukraine, in what may be the last stand for Ukrainian forces trying to hold it. The dramatic video capturing a series of shells exploding on the grounds was shared by the Ukrainian National Guard, though impossible to know exactly when it was shot. A Ukrainian commander there reports Russian forces have entered the site and that heavy, bloody battles were being fought. Unknown tonight, the fate of civilians still at the plant. But first tonight, what NBC News has just learned about the role of U.S. intelligence in the sinking of a Russian warship. Kelly Kobiea has late details.
Tonight, NBC News reports U.S. intelligence shared with Ukraine helped lead to Ukraine's sinking of the Russian cruiser Moskva, one of the most embarrassing setbacks Russia has faced since the start of the war. The news coming on the heels of a New York Times report that says the U.S. has given Ukraine real-time battlefield intelligence that American officials said led to the killings of Russian generals. NBC News has previously reported that the U.S. does share intelligence, but the Pentagon today denied targeting generals.
We do not provide intelligence on the location of senior military leaders on the battlefield.
In Ukraine tonight, the Mariupol steel plant facing assault, artillery exploding and smoke rising, seen in this video shared by the Ukrainian National Guard. A Ukrainian commander saying they're under attack from the air and ground. We're fighting heavy, bloody battles, he says. Hundreds are believed to still be hiding under that plant, many of them women and children. After about 100 were evacuated on Sunday, including Tatiana Trotsak, who was hiding underground for 2 months. I'm terribly worried about the civilians and wounded soldiers still there, she says. An advisor to President Zelensky claimed today the Russians want to declare victory in Mariupol by May 9th, when Russia celebrates its defeat of the Nazis in World War II, though Russia denies the claim. Tonight, as the battle rages for Mariupol's steel plant, those who fled wait and hope. Anna is 6 months pregnant. I wanted my child to be born in Mariupol, she says. We bought an apartment. We were fixing it up. We just never thought we'd be in this situation. Now, she says, it's hard to see a way back.
Kelly Kobiea is in Ukraine tonight. Kelly, there is another high-profile visitor coming to the region soon.
Lester, the White House announced First Lady Jill Biden will be traveling to Eastern Europe, and on Sunday, Mother's Day, will meet with aid workers and refugees on Slovakia's border with Ukraine. Lester?
Okay, Kelly, thank you. The Biden administration has said up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees will be admitted to the United States. The Homeland Security Department has already gotten about 13,000 applications through its online portal. But as Julia Ainsley reports, it's a painstaking process for some.
Svetlana Rogers was counting on President Biden.
This program will be fast. It will be streamlined.
Rogers is trying to get her sister's family, which fled from Ukraine to Poland, to her home in New Jersey. But when she logged on to the website to apply,
I was in shock. The requirements that they were asking to provide, it's, first of all, there is no clarity on anything.
Rogers has only seen her sister Olana and 8-year-old niece Yana over video call since the war began. In Warsaw, Olana is struggling to find work and even to buy food.
It's very hard.
For access to the U.S., the family had to track down a deed to prove they owned their war-ravaged home and paper vaccination records from overwhelmed hospitals.
They have their hands full. To find a nurse or to find a doctor on staff who will agree to do that for you, it's unbelievable.
The Biden administration has closed the U.S.-Mexico border to Ukrainian refugees, directing them all to this online portal where their American sponsors have to show they can provide financial support. Rogers finally collected the paperwork and is now waiting for an answer from the U.S. government.
It's hard along to be displayed from your home and your everyday life. To demand from them financial assets from the war zone, it's not necessary.
The Department of Homeland Security said it's working to streamline the process, but it can't say how long it will take those thousands of applications it has received to be processed. Lester?
Julia Ainsley, thank you. Now to that plunge today on Wall Street, the Dow plummeting more than 1,000 points, wiping out all the gains from yesterday's surge after the Fed announced a historic rate hike. Stephanie Rule is here. Stephanie, why the volatility?
A lot of this, Lester, has to do with the Federal Reserve. Yesterday, it raised rates by 0.5% to try to slow inflation, and off of that, markets soared. The Dow had a big gain of more than 900 points. But here we are a day later, and many on Wall Street are reconsidering Fed actions and worrying if it's going to be able to slow inflation without tipping the economy into a recession. Now, remember, we are still in an economic recovery, very good news, and the job market is healthy. Tomorrow we get the newest jobs numbers. But today is a reminder for the average investor, this is what markets do. They go up, but they also go down. And the best advice, do not try to time the market day in and day out. Invest for the long term.
All right, Stephanie Rule, thank you for that. At least one tornado already confirmed tonight amid another outbreak of severe weather. It comes after a violent night of storms in parts of Texas and Oklahoma. Morgan Chesky is following the damage in Texas.
Tonight, tornadoes tearing through Texas and Oklahoma. At least 8 reported twisters in the last 24 hours. One striking an East Texas RV park just hours ago, where officials say the storm injured 2 people amid a trail of destruction. In Seminole, Oklahoma, a brutal deja vu. The town already hit hard by a tornado Monday, suffering through a second twister. One teacher sharing the terrifying moments her family hid inside a school vault.
It felt like a train. My little boys were screaming. It was definitely scary.
In Texas, another nightmare. A storm hidden by nightfall, making a direct hit on the town of Lockett. In a sudden turn, the tornado caught a storm-chasing tour bus, blasting out its windows with 6 people still inside. And miraculously, every single person on board that tornado-damaged van was able to walk away. But tonight, millions more are bracing for more severe thunderstorms and dangerous winds. Lester.
Okay, Morgan, and Dylan Dreyer is tracking it all. Dylan, another night of severe storms?
Lester, we've been keeping a close eye
On this squall line of storms moving through Texas into Louisiana, we still have the threat of tornadoes tonight. Also winds over 70 miles per hour and hail 2 inches or more in diameter. Tomorrow, this whole storm system will shift to the east, bringing heavy rain, the chance of strong storms, especially through the Ohio and Tennessee river valleys and from the southeast all the way up to the northeast, especially down through parts of Alabama into Georgia. That's where we could see our strongest storms. Again, large hail, damaging winds, tornadoes can't be ruled out as well. But 38 million people are at risk of those storms tomorrow. We could also see about 3 to 4 inches of heavy rain, and that could lead to some flooding. Lester?
Hi, Dylan Dreyer, thanks. Tonight, an 8-foot fence has been put up around the Supreme Court amid protests after the leak of that draft Supreme Court decision that would overturn Roe v. Wade. And tonight, those on both sides of the battle over abortion rights are scrambling to respond. Here's Blaine Alexander.
The clinic. Lillian Newton is a patient advocate at Hope Medical Group for Women in Shreveport, Louisiana, a position she pursued after going there as a patient.
I don't know if I would have made it through an unplanned pregnancy managing my mental health.
If Roe v. Wade is overturned, abortions in Louisiana, legal up to 20 weeks, would be immediately outlawed. And yesterday, the state legislature advanced a bill that would charge mothers and providers with homicide. Bradley Pierce, president of the Foundation to Abolish Abortion, helped write that bill and says his organization is working with at least a dozen other states on anti-abortion legislation.
We believe that abortion is cruel, and it's the taking of an innocent life, and we should make that illegal. And there shouldn't be some exception for mothers.
As Americans await the fate of Roe v. Wade, today the Senate's top Democrat announced a last-ditch effort to protect abortion rights.
Next week, the U.S. Senate is going to vote on legislation to codify a woman's right to seek an abortion into federal law.
The measure is largely expected to fail, which is why some states are taking action. Today, Connecticut's governor signed a law to expand abortion access and protect medical providers and patients, including women from out of state. And some states are placing focus on abortion pills that can be administered by providers or through the mail. They're FDA approved for up to 10 weeks in a non-medical setting.
I definitely think that we will see medication abortions increase. That may be easier in some cases than coordinating a visit at a time where a clinic has availability.
Legal experts say that paves a difficult path for states on both sides of the issue.
You'll see states in conflict with each other. You'll see states in conflict with the federal government. You won't see an end to court battles.
For now, Americans are watching the Supreme Court for a final decision. Blaine Alexander, NBC News.
And just breaking, the FDA putting new limits on Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine because of a rare blood clotting and bleeding issue. The FDA says only adults who can't get another vaccine should get the J&J shot. And as the country surpasses 1 million COVID deaths, concerning new signs tonight with cases, hospitalizations, and deaths all rising again. Here's Gabe Gutierrez.
Tonight, a new Omicron subvariant is fueling another COVID surge across much of the U.S. In Maine, an elementary school has shifted to remote learning after 30% of its students and staff got sick.
It's frustrating because I thought we had kind of come out of the woods on this.
Now, the CDC forecasts COVID hospitalizations and deaths will rise over the next 4 weeks. That comes as the COVID death toll in the U.S. climbs above 1 million.
That number is devastating.
Dr. Umesh Gidwani runs the cardiac ICU at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. The state's COVID hospitalizations just topped 2,000 for the first time since February. California has seen its rate of new COVID cases increase nearly 70% in the past 2 weeks. And in Seattle, a Carnival cruise ship docked this week after passengers say more than 100 people were infected.
They were overwhelmed.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has tested positive just days after attending the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
The nation's most distinguished super spreader event.
That event is now facing growing scrutiny as more guests test positive, including several staffers from NBC News. The dinner mandated proof of vaccination and a same-day negative test, though other social events in D.C. that weekend may have had more lenient requirements. The president of the White House Correspondents Association says our event implemented protocols that went beyond any guidance or regulation issued by the CDC or the D.C. Health Department. And today, the World Health Organization estimated there have been nearly 15 million COVID-related deaths globally, roughly 3 times the official number. Lester?
An astonishing number, Gabe. Thank you. History is being made at the White House with the announcement of a new press secretary. Karine Jean-Pierre is the first black woman and the first openly gay person to take on that role. She is set to take over when Jen Psaki leaves on May 13th. In 60 seconds, fireworks in the courtroom. Actress Amber Heard testifying against ex-husband Johnny Depp in his $50 million defamation lawsuit against her.
In this market of one.
Baghdad woke to hazy skies and thick blankets of sand. People were urged to stay indoors, and many said the storms are coming more frequently and changing their lives.
This dust is due to lack of rain. 3 years without rain. I work as a coffee vendor. I hold the coffee pot in my hand and it all becomes covered in dust. No one wants to drink it anymore. Same goes for the tea and falafel vendors. They all left. They've been gone for 2 days now.
Iraq has also witnessed record temperatures in the last 2 years, with summer heat reaching 125 degrees. Parts of Texas and Oklahoma picked up the pieces today after tornadoes ripped through Wednesday evening. By morning, damaged homes were visible in Seminole, Oklahoma, near Oklahoma City. A marijuana farm in a nearby town was also hit hard. One teacher in Seminole told last night of sheltering in a school vault with her family.
As the storm hit, it seemed like it lasted forever, and it started to pull the vault door open. My husband and my 15-year-old son held the vault door shut as the tornado was going over. It sounded like a train, and we could also hear glass breaking.
So scary, and in the wake of the storms, thousands of customers lost power and some roads were closed, but there were no serious injuries. OPEC and its oil-producing allies are sticking to their plan of gradually increasing production. Today's decision came despite calls for the cartel to make up for the loss of Russian oil. Oil prices in the U.S. have risen more than 40% since the year began. And President Biden today named Karine Jean-Pierre as his White House press secretary. She will be the first black woman and the first openly LGBTQ person to serve in the post. Jean-Pierre is currently deputy to Jen Psaki, who will step down on May 13th. It has been widely reported that she will join the cable network MSNBC. Still to come on the NewsHour, the pandemic and politics worsen the mental health issues faced by LGBTQ youth. Abortion providers face an uncertain future as they await the Supreme Court's expected ruling on Roe v. Wade. A Minneapolis restaurateur revives native cuisine and trains aspiring chefs in indigenous traditions, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Russian efforts to seize the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol are meeting fierce resistance today as Ukrainian fighters continue their last-ditch stand in the port city. The efforts to evacuate civilians go on, but with more than 100,000 people trapped there, remains so much to do. Nick Schifrin reports again tonight from Kyiv.
Near the front line in Ukraine's east, the Russian missile that blew out an apartment building left its deadly debris on a residential street. The air raid sirens outlasted the windows from which disgusted residents tossed their life possessions. And taking shelter in their now uninhabitable home, shell-shocked residents with the bloodstains of Russia's brutal bombardment. Family living rooms, now debris and a pile of rubble. Those who survived count their blessings.
I don't know what there is to say. One moment it sounded far away, then the roof started crumbling down.
And more Russian bombs rained down across the country. Moscow released video of new strikes, including on Ukrainian armored vehicles and tanks, and on infrastructure that could carry Western weapons, including this bridge in Dnipro, Ukraine's third largest city. But the focus remains on Mariupol, and within a city in ruins, the sprawling Azovstal steel plant. Russia and its separatist allies released this video of Russian troops trying to storm the plant as it continues a relentless attack from the air. Deep underneath those explosions, civilians have been cowering for 2 months, and outgunned soldiers have fought the plant and city's final stand, led by the Azov Battalion, which began as far-right militants now integrated into the Ukrainian army.
We call on the global community to evacuate civilians, and I personally appeal to the commander-in-chief to take care of wounded soldiers who are dying in agony from inadequate treatment. Provide the opportunity to pick up the bodies of soldiers so that Ukrainians can say goodbye to their heroes.
Member of Parliament Serhiy Taruta says half a dozen civilians and soldiers in Azovstal die every day.
There's practically no food, practically no water. Lots of them are sick, lots of them are wounded. Azov could have broken out and left both Azovstal and Mariupol, but the fact that they are responsible for 500 wounded does not allow them to do that. They will never surrender, and they will fight till the end.
Taruta is a wealthy industrialist from Mariupol and former governor of the Donetsk region that includes Mariupol. We first met him in 2014 when NewsHour's Margaret Warner visited his office, and then 2 months later when he was forced to work in a hotel after pro-Russian separatists seized his office and much of the Donbass. Today, Russia's invasion has extended its territorial control of the Donbass into Mariupol's center. This week, a senior Putin aide visited Mariupol, vowing to make it Russian.
It's important for all of Ukraine that Mariupol is not entirely taken over.
But Ukraine can't stop Russia from targeting civilians and soldiers in the plant, some of whom recently escaped.
When these civilians are leaving the plant, the Russians can see from their drones where they are coming from. And after that, at night, they start bombing these locations.
Is there anything that Ukraine can do to save Azovstal?
I wish all world leaders increased their pressure on Putin. There has to be a very harsh pressure until they're all out. But we have to do it very, very urgently.
It's already too late to save much of the city. This was home for two sisters and their family wrecked by Russian bombs that fell constantly and created a terrifying daily soundtrack. The bombs set fires to their neighbors' homes. Inside their home that they grew up in, the family sheltered as best they could. 28-year-old Vera and her 4-year-old son, KELO, protected only by a wooden table. Today in Kyiv, Vera and KELO are safe. She and her sister Nicole look at photos of a happier time before their city and lives were shattered. They haven't heard from their mom, still trapped in Mariupol in more than 2 weeks.
It's impossible to open my photo library and look at pictures of us laughing, having fun. This is practically suicide. If I do, my heart shatters. I don't understand why, how, at some point.
A 4-year-old boy and his family forced from their home and from their hometown that today barely exists. The sisters say that they want their mother to leave Mariupol quickly because they fear that if she stays too long, she could end up behind Russian lines permanently. As for the Azovstal plant, both Taruta and Mariupol's deputy mayor tell me that they hope Ukrainian forces can actually launch a counteroffensive in the city in the next 2 to 3 weeks. That's because of all of that American artillery that is flowing into the country and into eastern Ukraine. But, Judy, it is not clear if the soldiers inside the Azovstal plant or the civilians can hold out that long.
We thank you, Nick, and a reminder that our coverage of the war in Ukraine is supported in partnership with the Pulitzer Center. Over the past few months, the Biden administration's rhetoric about its ultimate goals for Ukraine appears to have shifted. Officials are talking more about winning the war against Russia. At the same time, the White House has increased military support for Ukraine, raising concerns that it could provoke Russia to use weapons of mass destruction. For a closer look at the questions raised by all this, we get two views. Evelyn Farkas is the executive director of the McCain Institute at Arizona State University. During the Obama administration, she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Eurasia. And John Mearsheimer is a political science professor at the University of Chicago. He has written extensively about U.S. national security. His latest book is The Great Delusion: Liberal Dreams and International Realities. And we welcome you both back to the NewsHour. John Mearsheimer, I'm going to start with you. Do you believe U.S. goals for Ukraine have changed, and if so, how?
Well, I think initially the Biden administration thought the best we could do in Ukraine was to stymie the Russian offensive by assisting the Ukrainians. But when it became clear that the Ukrainians were doing very well on the battlefield against the Russians, we escalated and eventually greatly escalated our goals. And we're now bent on inflicting a decisive defeat on Russian forces in Ukraine. In other words, beating them decisively on the battlefield, and in addition, wrecking the Russian economy with sanctions. And all of this is designed to greatly weaken Russian power. Secretary of Defense Austin has made this very clear. And in fact, one could argue that what he and his colleagues in the Biden administration are interested in doing is knocking Russia out of the great power ranks.
Evelyn Farkas, do you see the same thing going on that John Mearsheimer does?
Some of it, but not exactly. So the underlying objective, and this runs from the Obama administration through the Trump administration, actually, despite what President Trump said himself, his cabinet kept the same policy vis-a-vis Ukraine, and all the way to today. Our objective has been to protect Ukraine's right to its sovereignty, the borders as they exist, and of course their right to associate with NATO or the European Union. So that is steady going, but I would agree with Professor Mearsheimer that there's been a change in the Biden administration. They have recognized that the only way to stop Vladimir Putin is not through sanctions, not through trying to appeal to the Russian people, but it's actually by defeating Ukraine on the battlefield as fast as possible.
And just continue.
Sorry, defeating Russia, not Ukraine.
And continuing at that point, Evelyn Farkas, I mean, I hear John Mearsheimer saying what it looks like the U.S. is now saying is they want to not just degrade the Russian military, but almost wipe it out and do the same thing to the Russian economy.
Well, here's where I disagree. I don't think that this administration, the Biden administration, cares whether Russia maintains its economic power in principle, whether it maintains its military power in principle. But this aggressive foreign policy being conducted by Vladimir Putin essentially since 2008, when they invaded Georgia, the first neighbor they invaded and occupied, is not going to stop while Vladimir Putin is in the Kremlin, while he has the money to support this foreign policy, this military aggression. And so the administration has decided that now they must weaken Russia as much as possible to put an end to this current foreign policy, adopted by the Kremlin. But it's not something that they wish permanently. That is not a policy decision that I see coming out of the White House at all.
But what I hear you describing, John Mearsheimer, is something that you believe is dangerous, that it could get the U.S. Into a situation where the Russians are retaliating in ways that the U.S. isn't prepared to deal with.
I think, Judy, this policy that the Biden administration is following is remarkably dangerous and foolish. We know that the one circumstance in which a great power is likely to use nuclear weapons is when its survival is threatened, when it thinks a decisive defeat is being inflicted on it. And what the Biden administration is bent on doing is inflicting a decisive defeat on Russia. We are threatening its survival. We are presenting the Russians with an existential threat. And this, again, is the one circumstance where they might use nuclear weapons. And I think we should be going to enormous lengths to make sure that we don't put them into a position where they even countenance using nuclear weapons, much less use them.
Evelyn Farkas, is that the risk here that the U.S. confronts by changing the goal?
Well, Russia's nuclear policy does allow for the use of nuclear weapons first against an adversary if it feels that the existence of the state is in question, that it's in jeopardy. And I think that leaves a lot of room for subjective interpretation, and of course that will be Vladimir Putin's interpretation. But I think what we cannot forget right now is that we are also a nuclear power. We have deterrence in place. Vladimir Putin does not want a nuclear war with the United States or NATO, and for that matter, he doesn't want a conventional war with us either, because he can barely win the one he's waging right now in Ukraine. So I don't think we should be deterred by this fear that he's going to reach for nuclear weapons. We cannot rule it out. I'm not dismissing it, But I also think that the objective that we have right now, the stakes are so high. It's nothing less. It's not just about Ukraine. It's about the international order. And we're fighting here to stop Vladimir Putin from turning after Ukraine to Georgia and Moldova, to destroying NATO, to essentially reasserting a sphere of influence system, which is what we put to bed after the end of World War II when we set up the United Nations and the rules-based order.
John Mearsheimer, I hear you saying you fear that Russia cannot be deterred, that there may be a decision made by Vladimir Putin to use weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons, and that that the U.S. is moving inexorably in that direction?
Well, I think it's very important to understand that if he were to use nuclear weapons, he would use them in all likelihood in Western Ukraine. And there are no NATO or American forces in Western Ukraine. So he would not be attacking us. He would be using those weapons in Ukraine. And the question is, what do we do then? And I'm not sure what we would do then. Would we use nuclear weapons? Would we then get dragged into the war? You know, when Professor Farkas talks about the consequences of this for the world order, I'm more worried about the consequences if we end up getting hit with nuclear weapons. I mean, we want to remember what President Kennedy did during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was in a similar situation. What he did was he tried to dampen the conflict. He tried to work out some sort of deal with Khrushchev so we could both avoid getting vaporized. What the Biden administration is doing is exactly the opposite. It's upping the ante. It's putting Putin in a position where he might very well use nuclear weapons. Again, I think this is remarkably foolish.
Evelyn Farkas, what do you see happening if Vladimir Putin were to resort to tactical nuclear weapons? What do you see the U.S. response?
Again, I think he's most likely to use them, Judy, if he feels that there will be no consequences for him. If he thinks that we will not counter with a nuclear use, I know it's a horrible thing to contemplate, but that is how deterrence works. Or if he thinks that we will not enter the war directly. And actually, I think that I'm not sure whether our government would actually use nuclear force in response, though we have to say that because that's part of deterrence. But what I do think is that if there is a nuclear use, if the nuclear taboo comes off, if nuclear weapons are used for the first time since World War II, and Vladimir Putin may well do that if he thinks we won't respond, I think President Biden will then enter the war directly. That doesn't mean troops on the ground, but it means that Russia will lose. So I think that Vladimir Putin is likely smart enough to understand the danger for himself. He's not going to reach for a nuclear weapon right now. He is already proceeding, I think, a little bit more cautiously from what we can see. Of course, it remains to be seen how this all ends. But he's not interested in taking on the United States and NATO.
Well, these are enormous questions, and we are going to be coming back to them. But it is so important to begin to explore this tonight, as we have with both of you. John Mearsheimer, Evelyn Farkas, we thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
Value out there, and my top long shot is Mo Danical from the rail. Unfortunately, we know that we haven't seen a horse from the one position from the rail win the Kentucky Derby since 1986 with Ferdinand, but I think
with traditional accounts at big banks, the impact won't be felt overnight. A sure sign that summer is right around the corner. Outdoor concerts are set to return to the Sioux Falls area. Levitt at the Falls revealing the 2022 season lineup earlier today. The group has assembled 50 free concerts at the Levitt Shell in Falls Park. The series gets underway June 3rd with the Burros. From there, the performances continue until September 10th. All concerts are free, with the lawn opening at 6:30 in the evening and the music beginning at 7.
You know, the beautiful thing about coming to a concert at the Levitt is that you see everyone. People from all walks of life are here. You can come, bring a blanket, bring your dinner with you, and just come and enjoy. It's free, it's accessible, and it's fun.
And there are even some concerts for the kids. This Friday, the Friday Morning Family Series features 5 performances, with the first concert beginning on June 10th. For a complete look at the Levitt season, just head on over to this story on your Dakota News Now app. We're hoping that the weather for those days is very fair and favorable. For the most part, Austin, today was not too bad.
No, not at all, Sam. You know, we didn't really have a lot of sunshine, at least for the eastern and southeastern parts of the area. You went further west, though, and we had a lot more sunshine. But temperatures really not all that bad for this time of the year, and we didn't have much wind. Of course, we've been talking about that for quite some time. Here's a look at First Alert Live Doppler right now, and you can kind of see on there where the thicker cloud cover is. You can basically draw a line from Mobridge to Pier to Winter. East of there, lots of clouds, a few breaks at times. You go west of there, a lot more sunshine. And here's how much rain we've seen since midnight. Most of the totals under 1/10 of an inch. 5/100ths in Sioux Falls, Brookings, and Watertown. Yankton, though, the only exception. They've picked up 42/100ths of an inch. So again, any little bit of rain we can get, we will certainly take. Temperatures mostly in the middle and upper 50s to near 60. You go further west, and we're in the middle to even upper 60s. Buffalo and Phillip right now just shy of 70. But compared to 24 hours ago, most locations are at least a couple degrees warmer than where we were at this time.
Do not care what agencies they need to create in order to get the job done.
And Tommy, in line with that, in terms of what they need to do, the doxing of the Supreme Court justices, the conservative ones who, you know, apparently, we don't know yet for sure, have signed on to the Alito decision overruling Roe versus Wade and Casey. I mean, it comes from the top, literally. They have no problem, starting with Maxine Waters, get in their faces. How do the American people not see this?
Endorsement. And the new revelations put him in the company of many other Trumpsters caught talking out of both sides of their mouths, like the most secretly recorded person in Congress, Kevin McCarthy, who we learned yesterday discussed using the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office, but worried the process would take too long. The cult of MAGA was also on display in last night's Republican Senate debate in Pennsylvania, where in a particularly odd moment, one candidate raved about the former president's most ludicrous idea.
Ambassador Sands, when you were ambassador to Denmark, President Trump offered to buy Greenland from Denmark. What did you think about that?
He was the third U.S. president to make that suggestion, and I thought it was an awesome idea because he's a deal guy.
As Greenland's government said at the time of Trump's comments, Greenland is not for sale. Most of the fire last night was aimed at Dr. Mehmet Oz, whose argument was a thinly veiled impression of his fellow former TV star, while repeating one thing.
President Trump endorsed me, calling me America first. Desperate Dave, dishonest again. Once again, President Trump endorsed me. I will do that for the very reason President Trump endorsed me. The reason President Trump endorsed me, and he gave a lot, was that he knew I would win in November.
Did President Trump endorse you, Dr. Oz? Well, I couldn't get that from your statements. Well, it remains to be seen, I should say, that if that is enough to win over Pennsylvania Republican voters. The former president will appear with Oz at a rally tomorrow. Maybe he'll even remember his last name. Although the cult of Trump is so strong, getting it wrong was no problem for Trump. For Trump-endorsed MAGA hedge funder J.D. Vance in his primary next door in Ohio. And that's next after the break.
This is an urgent appeal from
in Louisiana who choose to get an abortion charged with homicide. In Texas, the governor's going to challenge the right to public education for children. In Oklahoma, they're passing bills that you can't even get an abortion in case of life of the mother. If this doesn't motivate people, if this doesn't get you going, then I can't do anything to help you. And I tell you who's not helping is these progressive advocacy groups. No one cares what they say. No one fears them. And they need to start dispatching people to Georgia and North Carolina and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Nevada and Arizona and places like that and get out of Washington and get out of talking points and get out there in the field and start registering people and motivating people. That's what I think.
James Carville, thank you. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Aaron. You bet.
And next, desperate migrants lining up at the border as a law that allowed United States officials to turn away more than 1 million migrants is about to be lifted.
How do you deal with thousands of migrants knocking on the doors of America?
And U.S. Marshals releasing new photos tonight, hoping they will lead to the capture of the dangerous escaped inmate and the woman who allegedly helped him. Sheriff leading the case is my guest.
What do you think healthier looks like?
They're watching the West come together and put sanctions on Russia that are having an impact. They also see Russia, this formidable force that everyone was afraid of stumbling in Ukraine and are realizing that maybe they're not as good as they think they are either. And so all of those things have to be taken into consideration.
You look at the difference between China and Russia, though. Obviously, their military and the spending that's been on it and their development and all the technology they've stolen from us is a lot more significant. GDP of China, 10 times larger than Russia. China, 30 times as many bank assets as Russia. Huge foreign portfolios in China. There's no way to compare these two countries. Can the world come together against China if they invade Taiwan in the way it's turned Russia into an economic pariah?
Yeah, I think so, because while you're, sort of looking at the difference between China and Russia, I'd suggest you look at the difference economically between Taiwan and Ukraine. Taiwan makes 94% of all the high-end semiconductors. The West cannot tolerate China seizing control of Taiwan. So absolutely, we're going to push back. Everyone's going to unite, and probably even more so than with Ukraine.
Okay, so it's obviously always a lot easier to prevent an invasion than it is to fight a war.
Yeah.
Great piece in the Wall Street Journal today about effectively turning Taiwan, in their words, into a porcupine, because a wolf can eat a porcupine, it just decides not to because it's not worth the trouble. They suggest Harpoon missiles, Switchblade drones, Patriot missile battalions, more Stinger missiles, which obviously we've got our own issues with. And F-16 fighter jets, obviously the anti-ship missiles that would sink the Chinese Navy as it came across. Why is there not as much of an effort to arm Ukraine as that we're seeing? Why isn't that same effort being put into arming Taiwan?
Well, we've been arming Taiwan. We've had the Taiwanese Defense Act for it's decades. So we've been supporting Taiwan for years with military equipment and training. So that's been going on for really decades. So could we do more? Should we do more? Absolutely. What we've got to do is make the consequences of China attacking Taiwan so great that they choose not to do so. That's real deterrence, right? And maybe there's some more things we should do. There's some things that we know we're doing that we're not, I'm not going to talk about on this on TV, but very clearly, that theory of making it a porcupine, that's absolutely the right strategy.
Is it yet? Is it a baby porcupine? Is it a full porcupine? We just don't say it's a porcupine, and the Chinese know that? Where are we in the evolution of the porcupine?
I will tell you that it will be very expensive for China to take Taiwan.
And obviously, the Ukrainians really, or the Russians, I should say, really miscalculated in terms of what kind of porcupine Ukraine was as we follow this out. You've been talking about it since the very beginning. We're now learning that so much more U.S. help was given to Ukraine than anyone talked about. And I remember some smiles from you in the very beginning of the invasion. And now we're learning U.S. help given to targeting Russian generals, U.S. help to targeting Russian ships, a lot more real-time intelligence sharing than we thought in Ukraine. Have we gone past where everyone was when we said the last thing we want to do is give the Russians an excuse to come back and attack us?
Well, I think the red line that we've put on ourselves, or the constraints we've put on ourselves, are Americans shooting at Russians, right? So the no-fly zone, which was a big issue at the beginning of this thing, we said, nope, we're not doing that because we don't want American pilots shooting down Russian pilots. I mean, we've come we're right up on the edge of that, but we have not crossed that. And I think that is the real red line for Russia. And so far, we've stayed on this side of that red line.
If you think about sort of these tales that we heard, we now know that the ghost of Kyiv, the fighter pilot, was made up by the Ukrainians and their PR. No part of war is PR, so no fault there. But, they really aren't as good as we think they are. A lot of these Ukrainian successes basically were U.S. intel telling them where to shoot and what to do, right?
Well, very clearly, their success has been, not only their tenacity and the training that our special forces have been doing in that country for many, many years. It's also the intelligence that we've given them, the equipment that we've given them. I mean, we're definitely helping the Ukrainians be successful. They're acknowledging that. I mean, I was texting with the foreign minister, and they're thankful for what we're doing. But clearly, they're the ones bleeding and dying.
Yeah.
And we have to give them, massive kudos for that. They're pushing back. Mariupol still hasn't been taken by the Russians. So these Ukrainians are tenacious people. They love freedom, and they're willing to fight and die for it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think you and I, in the first days of the war, you probably understood that better than I did, having been over there more recently. But there was this time for 48 hours when everybody thought this was going to be over, and now we're well past 48 days, and they're still at it. This was Nancy Pelosi in Kyiv on Sunday. Take a listen.
America stands with Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine until victory is won.
She had just gotten back from Kyiv. Victory is won. The 2014 war in Ukraine hasn't ended yet. This is an extension of it. Is the American people really ready for how long victory is going to take?
Everywhere I go, Leland, I talk about that so that people understand